Welcome to First Principles with Phill Klein, and we are recording this podcast on the eve of an anniversary of a cowardly and terrorist attack upon the United States on September 11th, when two planes destroyed the World Trade Center in New York City. And it is also the eve of another attack upon American interests overseas. September 11th on 2012, a group of Al-Qaeda terrorists attacked our embassy outpost in Benghazi, Libya. My guest today is one of the men who was there. He was stationed at a CIA annex. He saw the conflagration around the embassy, and he mobilized with others to protect that embassy and its personnel. Tragically, they were held up and prevented from moving swiftly. 4 Americans died in that attack. And Mark Geist, former Marine, former chief of police, one of the men responding to the scene in Benghazi, Libya, and putting his life on the line for the nation again, is my guest today. Mark, thank you for joining us. And I want to mention that you've got a book out regarding Benghazi. A movie has been made of that, 13 hours. I would encourage all our listeners to get that book if you want to understand the truth of what the circumstances were like on the ground in Benghazi. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Phill, thanks for having me.
You know, it is rather remarkable that in some ways, from my perspective, where I said, we see a repeat in history of failed civilian leadership causing the loss of American lives overseas. And let me ask you, as you've seen our withdrawal from Afghanistan, the loss of 13 soldiers, Americans, and equipment left behind, do you, Mark, see parallels between that and Benghazi, and what parallels do you see?
You know, the first thing that jumps out is the people who are in charge now making decisions, and the people that were in charge then making decisions. They're all part of the same crew. I mean, Psaki, she worked for State Department. She was instrumental in formulating the response to the incident after the fact from the media standpoint. Susan Rice was involved then. She's involved now. President Biden is involved now, making ultimately carrying those decisions and weighing and owning that, supposedly, or at least as he says, the buck stops there. Well, the buck never stops there, because then he turns around and blames somebody else, just like they did in Benghazi. I mean, it's total lack of taking responsibility, lack of leadership. And that's the first thing that jumps out bigger than anything. And secondly, it's leaving Americans behind. I mean, there was no reason to have to leave any Americans or our allies or those Afghani nationals who have served us and helped us so much in the fight against Al-Qaeda and AQ and ISIS. It's just, it's painful to understand that we can do that to those who have helped us so much.
Well, stepping back into Benghazi a little bit and exploring those decisions. Now, and for our listeners, this was an Al-Qaeda orchestrated attack upon American soil in Libya, essentially. And
yes, it was.
How far away are you at the CIA annex?
As a crow flies, about a mile.
So you're a mile away. You're seeing this develop, and you're being told not to respond. Am I correct?
Yeah. Now, to be completely transparent, I myself was out in town with a female case officer. We were out on a dinner date, is what I'll call it. But the rest of the team was back at the annex, and when they got the call of what was happening at the consulate, they were immediately ready to go. And our chief of base 3 times told them to wait or to stand down or to not go, trying to prevent them from not wanting them to go and leave to go help the security team at the consulate.
Did they give any justification for that stand down?
No, they didn't. The first one I do kind of understand a little bit. I mean, you're trying to, we are a CIA clandestine base. We are not wanting to, we're not necessarily there, so to speak. So you don't want to give that up if you don't have to. So he's trying to determine what assets he can use. Well, the unfortunate thing is that's great for foreign policy, but it's unfortunate and it doesn't work when you're talking about an attack on a facility where it may save lives, because seconds count. And getting us over there and allowing to use your people that you know and trust, or they should know and trust, which I think there is one of the failures, is not knowing them, the chief of base not knowing the assets and the capabilities, or trusting the capabilities, is getting our eyes on target to see what actually is there, so you get real-time intel instead of you're getting it from some third country national or from some asset that you don't necessarily have 100% trust in.
I see. And was the mobilization of your group to that site where they were attacking Ambassador Stevens and others, was that in a defiance of orders, or was that along the chain of command something that was authorized?
Well, basically what it boiled down to is when the team leader from this State Department security team came over the radio and said, if you don't get here now, we're all going to die. The boys just said, you know what, we're going to go. And they just quit listening to the chief of base, who strictly in the chain of command, when it comes to security, he's not in our chain of command. He wouldn't be in it. So his decision making, we try to appease them because they have a chain of command, and we have a chain of command that doesn't necessarily always converge and it does in all aspects other than when there's a security threat. And that's when we're there to make those decisions. We're the professionals, and that's what our purpose is to make those decisions on how that is to be done.
And so you acted, and you all responded, and you were seriously injured in that attack.
Yeah, the team responded over. I made our way back to the annex. I took over security there while the rest of the team was over at the consulate. They got attacked. They got counter assaulted one more time. They couldn't find the ambassador's body, so they gathered everybody up. They couldn't defend an indefensible position, made their way back to the annex. And then when they got back to the annex, the bad guys had then followed back the State Department team when they came and attacked us 3 more times throughout the night, ending in a complex attack early in the morning where Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty were killed, and I was severely injured.
Well, thank you for your service through all these years, and thank you for your courage in getting at the truth. And it's unfortunate that it takes courage to speak the truth. I know right after this, on September 14th, 3 days after the attack, Susan Rice is going out to the media, and she's blaming a gentleman who created a cheap video as offending, as blasphemy against Muhammad, offending Muslims, and causing a spontaneous riot. In fact, I'm reading the words of talking points given to her by Ben Rhodes, President Obama's Deputy National Security Advisor at the time, that she is to underscore that these protests are rooted in an internet video and not a broader failure of policy. Now, as one who was there and who sacrificed defending American interests, how did it hit you when you started to see this story come forward?
I was laying in the hospital in Germany at the time, and it just, we had never heard anything about this video that was out there. I mean, the video itself had been out on the internet for a lot. I think it's over 6 months prior to this. And basically that video was used to agitate a lot of people in Egypt on September 11th, 2012. And that's where a lot of that, I think that's where they got the talking points from, is because what we saw that day, if you go back and look, is there was a lot of protests in Egypt against our embassy there. That started at 10 o'clock in the morning. So, which tells me 2 things, is if that was the case, and we know that is, there were assets that were put on alert early that morning. And they should have been alerted and stayed on alert because of the potential threat to our embassy in Cairo, Egypt. So to not say that they weren't available when things happened later that night was ridiculous. And two is trying to paint this picture. I mean, and it's just what they're doing now, like with the Pfizer vaccine. They're saying it's fully approved when you go to the FDA website, and it says right there in the Emergency Use Authorization Act that it is not a fully approved. That does not, the FDA doesn't fully approve it. They just say what they want because they know that people, the average person, doesn't have the time or take the time to go research and see what's valid. And then they also have the media on their side. So, they basically control most of the media. So the average person doesn't know the truth, and they expect that they have trust in their elected officials to be honest.
Well, it is extraordinarily difficult to learn from past mistakes when our leaders refuse to acknowledge those mistakes and refuse to acknowledge the truth of those mistakes. And now we're facing something similar in Afghanistan, as Americans are left behind in Afghanistan. Before we went on, Mark, I told you about Secretary of State Blinken's and the Secretary of State's explanation about those Americans who are on the tarmac and the planes that are not leaving with private efforts to rescue Americans and Afghanis that were left behind in Afghanistan. And what the State Department said is, well, we are doing all that is possible, all that we can to get those Americans out. Anybody with proper paperwork can get out. But the problem is we can't verify whether they have proper paperwork because we have no assets on the ground, which is a stunning statement to me. It is admission that they did not do anything, and it is such doublespeak. I guess they believe the American people will not place any responsibility on the administration for removing all assets on the ground. Tell me what it's like. Those soldiers, those warriors, there at the Kabul airport, they see the chaos, see the inability of people to get there, and they're being told that they cannot help, they cannot act. What happens in your mind as your civilian authorities are telling you no when everything within you says I must?
Well, you look to your leadership in the military, and then, unfortunately, I think that they've lost some of their fortitude to stand up. And somebody had mentioned, a friend of mine had mentioned that and he knows the commander on the ground forces there of the 82nd Airborne, how he was such an admirable and honest and great leader. Well, a great leader isn't the guy that just follows orders blindly. I mean, he is the one guy that everyone looks to, that ground force commander, to make the right decision. And if he truly believed that the mission was not effective, then he should have, in my opinion, I think, and I know what I would have done. I would have got on a plane, flown back to DC, went up to the director of, to my command. I would have went up my command structure and said, you know what? This is not effective. This is not fair to our troops. We are putting them in harm's way. Here are my stars. I resign, and make a public statement out of it if it's truly that. But I think a lot of our, and I hate to talk, the people themselves, our politicians have forced our generals to be politicians, or at least be involved in that political process. And they've cut them off at the knees, and we need people who are going to stand up for the troops, because we're talking a bunch of 18, 19, 20 young Americans, men and women, who look up to the leadership to do the right thing. And when that fails, it's just unfortunate, because you're failing them, and that hits deep to the core of all those principles that we teach our young airmen, Marines, soldiers, and sailors, and Coast Guard when we're putting them through boot camp and training them up. And that's unfortunate that they get let down like that.
Well, I appreciate you articulating that with such integrity. I don't believe Americans understand the great strength of our nation has been the one of the things, it's obligation to duty and respect for the Constitution throughout our nation's history, not only by many people here domestically, but by our troops overseas. Civilian control of the military is a very difficult thing. It hasn't happened in most places in the world to make the military accountable to a people. But for it to work, the people have to hold civilian leadership accountable for their errors. And what you just described is a military leader and flowing up the chain of command, respecting civilian leadership to the point that they have to act with integrity and sacrifice their own career to make a point and hopefully persuade civilian leadership to do the right thing. Nobody did that in Afghanistan. Nobody did
No,
that.
they didn't. And so that just tells me that they're complicit in and agreeing that what was going on was correct, that leaving Americans behind is okay. I mean, one of the pillars of our military that we talk about all the time, it's in our ethos, it's in the core of who we are, is we never leave anyone behind. And we drill that into people. We're not going to do that. We want them to understand that, and the fathers and mothers out there, we want them to understand that, if your son or daughter is in a foreign country, we will not leave them behind. I mean, you look at what we've been doing in Vietnam, we are still going back now, trying to recover the remains of our military personnel that have died in the service of this country. Are we going to have to do the same thing in Afghanistan? Another 20 years from now, at the 40th year anniversary, if I'm still around, are we going to be talking about how we're now going back in there to recover the remains of those that were left behind? That is not something that I want to be a part of. I don't believe that that's what we want as Americans, as the people that control this government, or at least should and need to pull those reins back. It hits me to my core.
And thank you for saying that. Our nation was founded on a divine truth, and it's still, we're still struggling to recognize it because every people is a flawed people, but it is that each and every human being has intrinsic value. Their value is not determined by government. It's given by God at creation. So therefore we act to respect that value by protecting individual liberty and freedoms. And no man, no person left behind is the same thing. Every person has value to us. And now we're seeing a change in that. We're actually seeing that government is kind of weaponizing its institutions against certain American citizens because they disagree with them. And we saw kind of an inkling of that, I believe, in Benghazi when they decided to go after the video producer rather than speak truly about their own accountability and leadership. And I believe we somewhat see that with the Biden administration and their handling of Afghanistan. Now, are you in contact? I know you have worked to try to get people out of Afghanistan. Are you in contact with active military personnel?
No, not active duty military personnel. Everybody that we work with and support are veterans. And, one of them is an individual, his name's Brian. He was 20 years ago today, when the towers came down, he was one of the first people to go to the piles to help dig out Americans. He is all about bringing Americans home and getting them back to their loved ones. And he was, again, instrumental and he was one of the first ones as a civilian back into that region around Afghanistan and to help get Americans, our allies, and those who have helped us so much to get them out of the predicament that they have been left in. And he's continuing that downrange, and we're continuing to do anything we can to support them, both through myself and through my nonprofit called Shadow Warriors Project. And we're trying to help fund them as much as we can and make sure that they have all the tools to get Americans home and get our allies home.
Well, I want to make sure that we give our listeners the opportunity and our viewers the opportunity to support that project. I want to ask you a question about your conversation with veterans and your interaction with them now. What is the response? What is the morale as it relates to the recent events in Afghanistan?
I think that it's the morale is frustration, it's anger, that we're leaving people behind, that we're not bringing everybody home, that we've pulled out of Afghanistan in a way that, we can't predict the future, but I can say with hindsight that the way that it was done at the airport in Kabul, instead of holding the key ground in Afghanistan, which is Bagram Air Base, it's Bagram Air Base was held by the Russians because of its ability to be defended and the size of it. And it's throughout history, if you go back and look, that area around Bagram and that base is ground that has been held as very defensible and used throughout military history. And we failed to even study that or use that or listen to anybody who suggested that, and chose to use the Kabul airport, which has one runway instead of multiple runways, does not have the room to bring those people in to vet them, but keep them safe from the outside, but also keep them safe and our troops safe, and have that standoff that should have been there. And you can hypothesize, but I believe that those 13 American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that were killed in Afghanistan the last days of the pullout could have been prevented.
And you alluded to something. The Soviet Union pulled out of Afghanistan, and you're saying that they held that air base as a part of their removal of their assets from Afghanistan. Is that what you?
Yes, they did, and they held. I mean, that was one of the first bases that they took over, and it was something that was one of the last ones that they left from. And unfortunately, with the vacuum of America pulling out of Afghanistan, guess who's right back there? The Russians and the Chinese are back there.
Why do you think we did not do that? Have you heard explanations?
I have not. The explanation I heard was that the Kabul Air Base, or the Kabul Airport, HKI, was closer to the embassy than Bagram. Bagram is about 30 miles away. HKI Airport, the Kabul Airport, was about, I think it's 3 to 4 miles away, as the crow flies. So thinking that they could have got out there, and because, and here it is, they think that the embassy is the all-knowing, when what they should have done is moved the embassy instead of months earlier, knowing they were going to do the pullout, started moving the embassy and all its personnel to Bagram Air Base where it could be defended, instead of leaving that embassy in the middle of a city that hated us.
Yes. What are the critical lessons that you believe America must learn from Benghazi and from Afghanistan?
I think the critical lessons that we have to learn from over the last 20 years is that the American people are those that vote and are in charge, and that we have to demand from our politicians, from the lowest level to the highest, that they're responsible. They can delegate their authority, but they can't delegate their responsibility. And heavy is the head that wears the crown. We, the people, they work for us. I mean, something as simple as, they've got the Capitol building. That's Nancy Pelosi sits there and says, well, you have to do this and this to come to the Capitol, and you have to go through all of this. That's our building. That's the American people's house. Everyone that works in there works for us. We should have, and always in the past have had, unrestricted access to that. So then when they don't like it, they want to try to restrict the people that they don't want to come in and hold them accountable, because then people would see the lies and the deceit that's going on. And I think that's just incredulous. And we, the people, have to take back our government. We have to take control of it. And to do that, we have to remember that we're not a democracy, that we are a republic. We are 50 states, and each state is autonomous to itself and it answers to itself long before it answers to the federal government.
I think excellent points there, and it's quite fascinating. There has been a shift, I believe, over time, where the administration believes that the American people are the primary enemy, and well, they act in that fashion. They're combining with big tech to censor information, believing that the American people can't handle it. They put up barbed wire around our capital, believing that the American people are a threat to the capital. Yet at the same time, the threats that we see them negotiating with the leaders of those threats. In Afghanistan, they recently announced that their interior minister is a man that, and that's the equivalent of FBI director in the United States, is a man that we have identified as a world terrorist. He's a U.S. designated terrorist who played a role in 9/11, and we're acknowledging the Taliban as legitimate in the way that the Biden administration is acting. So it's rather stunning to me that we have an administration in power in America who believes the people that put them there are the enemy of American interest. At least they're acting that way. Mark, I greatly appreciate your sacrifice for our nation, your leadership, your willingness to speak into current situations and try to guide us in what we do. Can you tell our viewers and listeners how to help you?
You know, the best way that they can help is pray for us, because, you know, what we've done in this country is we've taken our creator, God, out of everything, and we're wondering why we're having problems. It's not because he's allowing it, it's because we put him on the sideline. We need to bring him back into our government, into our faith, into our personal faith, and bring him back into our schools where we can teach the right morals and the right ethics that are going to lead this country back to where it was founded. And two would be to, if you want to know more about me or what my organization is doing, it's shadowwarriorsproject.org. You can go there, find out more about us. And if you feel it on your heart to help us monetarily, it would be great if you donate. We do a lot of great projects that you can not only working with those overseas right now, but we're doing a lot of other projects in our ministry to continue to help those who have served us so well.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you for your time today. And thank you for that encouragement. And I hope we have the opportunity to speak again. This is Phill Klein, First Principles Prayer. You know, it's quite fascinating because I'm concerned that in our nation, we worship government today rather than our creator. And in all problems and all circumstances, government claims to fix and will repair the human condition. And it has failed time and time again. Yet those in authority keep trying to turn your eyes to government. In fact, Nancy Pelosi called the United States House of Representatives a sacred chamber, as if it was a religious shrine to what is significant in America and where America turns for its heart and its hope. We have a creator who desires to be a part of our life, to guide us, and will help us make those decisions in our lives that are virtuous and true and repair relationships with those around us. Seek hope there first, and then hold our government accountable. Freedom or liberty is an insecure place in that it involves self-responsibility, but it is a cherished place where you can pursue your hopes and dreams and build a better future for yourself and your family. Our nation needs to get back to these basic principles, and I appreciate Mark Geist living them and then speaking them to us and reminding us of what's real and what is false. Thank you for joining us. This is Phill Klein with First Principles.